policy. Otherwise, there will be once again there will be a rise of a right-wing populist party in this country.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right to raise this issue about the importance of control. One of the clear messages from the EU referendum was that people want to see control of our borders. And what this system does is provide just that. Going forward, under this new system, everyone that enters the UK will need permission, and that gives us a level of control that we have not had for 4 generations, for 4 decades.
Mr. David Hanson.
The electronic travel authorisation scheme that the Secretary of State has announced today, introduced, is very welcome, because it was one that the Labour frontbench, of which I was part, suggested in 2011. Could he tell the House how much he believes the development costs of that scheme will be, and whether or not it will monitor people who are leaving as well as those who are entering?
I can tell the honourable gentleman, firstly, it will give us information of people entering and leaving. In terms of costs, this is a scheme that internally we have just made a decision on to proceed with, and there will be further information as it's available.
Jeremy Lefroy.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. As a director or a member of the board of a university, I realise how much researchers from around the world contribute, but often they're on relatively low salaries. Can we look at making this not a salary cap, but all around the skills? Because skills and salary don't often equate.
Secretary.
My honourable friend makes a very important point, and my honourable friend, the Immigration Minister, was at the Francis Crick Institute this morning, and one of the things that she was rightly hearing about was just this issue. And in fact, the Migration Advisory Committee have identified this issue as well. They, for example, also talked about lab technicians, many of them working in our universities, and they often would not earn as high as £30,000, and that is something we are taking into account.
Chris Brandt.
I find it terribly depressing that the Prime Minister is still sticking with this language of tens of thousands. It's completely undeliverable. It's been undeliverable in relation to outside EU, let alone within EU. And in particular, I'm conscious that the Rhondda would never have been built if it hadn't been for miners coming from Ireland. We'd never have had frothy coffee and ice cream if it hadn't been for the Italians who came to work in the mines. We wouldn't have doctors keeping us healthy if it hadn't been for the Indian subcontinent. And today we wouldn't have enough care workers if it weren't for people coming from Poland, Latvia, Estonia and Spain. So I really hope that the Home Secretary will manage to change the whole rhetoric and tone behind the government's approach on this. And can you just tell us, where exactly have we got to on Tier 1 investor visas, which the government announced they were going to suspend 2 weeks ago, and then they announced that they were suspending the suspension 6 days later?
Very good.
Mr. Speaker, well, first of all, I am disappointed that in his list the honourable gentleman didn't mention pakoras and samosas from India and Pakistan. I would have thought that would have been the top of his list. But anyway, I won't. Well, I do, and so does the Labour front bench. And he makes a very important point, and I hope that as he has time to look at the white paper on the new immigration system, he will see that it is still a demonstration of how this country is open to talent from across the world, but with more control than we've had before. And we can do that in a way that we can bring net migration down to a more sustainable level, which is good for all our communities. It is important to have public confidence in the level of immigration. He's also asked me about Tier 1 visas. Tier 1 visas are still available as we speak, but we have set out a number of reforms that we need to put in place to make them more effective.
Sir David Evanet.
I welcome my right honourable friend's statement today as a sensible approach with a single system based on people's skills. However, would he agree with me that post-Brexit we will need to attract the brightest and the best from across the world to help meet the needs of our country and our economy, but also we must always be mindful of the pressures on our public services by numbers?
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend makes this important point about clearly the higher the population, the country rises, the more pressure there is on public services. And in some communities, we have seen a very rapid change in the local population, sometimes to do with high levels of migration to that community. And we must keep that in mind. I think it was one of the reasons that, that so many people voted to have control of our immigration system, and it is something that we must balance with the economic needs we have through migration.
Thangham Debonair.
Mr. Speaker, I am heartbroken. This immigration bill could have been an opportunity to show the world what an outward-looking nation we really are, the proud tradition that we have of challenging racism in all its forms, and instead it seems to be sitting a really, really unhappy and unfortunate turn, with language of cooling off periods for people who come here to work. There's a global forced migration crisis, Mr. Speaker, and so my question is, why has the Home Secretary, of all the other things that honourable friends have mentioned, why has the Home Secretary failed even to consider that this might have been an opportunity to reform the way this country responds to refugees?
Home Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure if the honourable lady has read the same white paper that I have.
Bob Blackney.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is absolutely right that the people of this country want to see firm but fair immigration positions. So what will my right honourable friend do to ensure that the rules are operated fairly, not only for the people coming from the European Union, but also, more importantly, for our Commonwealth partners, in particular from the Indian subcontinent?
Home Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend raises this important issue of fairness based on what someone has to contribute rather than nationality. And I think it was the case that during the referendum there are many British citizens that were concerned that, perhaps for their family and friends that they may have in the Indian subcontinent and other parts of the British Commonwealth, that they may not be getting the same treatment, as it were, the same access that others would because of preference that existed through the freedom of movement system. So that is changing under this new system, and I think all taken into account, this system is much fairer in its approach by focusing on skills rather than nationality.
Lisa Cameron.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The UK fashion and textile industry contributes £32 billion to the economy, but it thrives on a global pool of talent. As chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group, I have heard concerns from industry regarding impact upon freedom of movement. I'm sure that the Home Secretary would immeasurably suit Kathleen Hamnett's new T-shirt which states "Fashion hates Brexit." But what will he do to reassure this valuable industry that it will remain accessible and open to international talent?
Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, the honourable lady is right to raise the importance of the fashion and textile industry and more generally our creative industries, where the UK is a powerhouse, and one of the things we need to do to keep it that way is to make sure it can attract top talent from across the world. And I think there is much in this white paper that will help to achieve just that. But it is also an area that in some cases in the past that we've looked at having special visas for entry, even including for exhibitions and visitors and stuff like that. And so that is the kind of thing I think we can continue to look at.
Douglas Ross.
Speaker, the short-term workers route mentioned in the statement will not address the issue that myself and members across the House have raised about access for non-EEA labour on inshore fishing vessels. I have a constituent, Mr Scott in Lossiemouth, who fears that he will have to sell his boat and his business unless the government address this urgently. What can the Home Secretary do to address this issue for Mr Scott and others in Murray, Scotland and across the UK?
Home Secretary.
Well, I think that there's possibly 2 points my honourable friend has raised. One is the future immigration system, where I think, and I'm happy to speak to him about this in more detail afterwards, but I think the short-term route can help address the issue that he has raised. But perhaps also what I detect is a more immediate issue, not just something sort of post-2021 and later, but more immediate issue, because he mentioned non-EA, and that is also something I'm very happy to discuss with my honourable friend.
Louise Ellman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Home Secretary talks about fairness. But in reality, the Home Office displays a combination of hostility and inefficiency. Families split up because visas have been agreed but not issued. And in my local case, a Liverpool doctor who has worked in this country for many, many years after being trained here, having to go back to her country of origin because of a failure in the Home Office, and I'm still trying to seek a meeting with Home Office ministers on that case. Will the year-long conversation the Home Secretary spoke about include changing the attitude of the Home Office, people who apply fairly and within the rules?
Exactly.
Home Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very pleased the Honourable Lady has raised this important issue of fairness. The Home Office makes millions of immigration decisions, whether it's on visas or otherwise, each year, and we can't pretend that every single decision is going to be right. We heard earlier in the House the Right Honourable Lady raised the issue of Windrush, which was a problem under successive governments, and again we've got to learn the lessons from that. And also I heard carefully the Honourable Lady raised a live case from her constituency, and the Immigration Minister would be happy to meet with her and discuss that.
Henry Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I very much welcome the proposal set out by the Home Secretary to have an immigration system that gets the best talent from around the world for our economy and our public services. Will he also undertake in this piece of legislation to cover the loophole of descendants from the British Indian Ocean Territory whose rights have been abused for the best part of half a century?
Home Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I know that my honourable friend is very passionate about this issue. I know that he has championed it for a while. We have discussed it. Whilst it isn't something that's specifically addressed in the White Paper in terms of a future immigration system, I think he's right to continue raising this, and then we are right to continue to work with him to look at it.
Sammy Wilson.
I welcome the assurance that those who are living already in the UK will have their rights protected, and it is a great pity that the EU were prepared to use those people as a negotiating ploy in these negotiations. But could I ask the Secretary of State, what assurances can he give, given the cap of £30,000 which has been suggested in this paper, that areas like Northern Ireland will have access to labour from outside the United Kingdom if there are skill shortages which are required to keep production going in Northern Ireland?
Home Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I first of all thank the Honourable Gentleman for welcoming the scheme for the 3 million plus EU citizens that are here, whether they're in Northern Ireland or anywhere else in the UK. They are welcome to stay, and we indeed need them to stay. And so, and as I said earlier, and I'll say it again, it's got whether we have a deal or no deal, that scheme and their rights will be protected. On the specific issue of Northern Ireland and more regional shortages, what we have done in the White Paper is commit for the first time to a separate shortage occupation list for Northern Ireland, which I think will make a big difference.
Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I too visited the Crick Institute this morning, and I am sure that they, like I do, will welcome this White Paper. And I particularly welcome the consultation on the minimum salary requirements, because as my right honourable friend will know, scientists, researchers, but particularly technicians who contribute hugely to our economy aren't always rewarded in the most profitable way. Salary is not a proxy for skills. I know he gets that point, but we can't say it too often.
Home Secretary.
It's an important point that my honourable friend has emphasised. Whilst I think the logic of having a salary threshold is strong, it is also right that we look at cases where that won't quite work. And he's given an example of perhaps take lab technicians where salaries can be say £21,000, and there are a variety of ways to try and deal with that in this White Paper, and I hope he will welcome this.
Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'm one of those who's valued free movement, but I do welcome what the Home Secretary has said today about overseas students. Is he in a position to English language tests?
Home Secretary.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for his comments? And as he's pointed out in the White Paper, honourable colleagues, we are still looking at that issue, but we are taking it very seriously.
Rebecca Powell.
Deputy Speaker, I very much welcome the Secretary of State coming to give us this
announcement today, but also very much welcome the fact that international students will still be allowed to come here to study, but there's no dedicated route for unskilled labour and those earning below 30,000. So how will the department support employers in Taunton Deane, particularly in agriculture, tourism and the care industry, to get the labour that they need under this new system?
Home Secretary.
There are a couple of things I will tell my honourable friend, Madam Deputy Speaker. And, first of all, in terms of students, indeed we want to try and increase more students, trying to get more international students choosing the UK, and there are measures here today to do that, and I know that the Department of Education takes that very seriously as well. And in terms of the need for workers with different skills, and especially skills that might not be classed as high skill under this paper, there's the short-term workers route, which I think will make a big difference.
Kate Green.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. At a quick glance, I can only find 2 paragraphs in Chapter 6 on self-employment, and the Home Secretary will know how important that is, particularly, for example, in the construction sector, to fill gaps in vital roles such as bricklayers, electricians and carpenters. Can he say whether it will be possible for the industry or industry bodies to have some sort of umbrella sponsorship scheme to ensure that we can continue to recruit workers to those roles in order to meet the government's own growth and house building expansion plans?
Home Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's an important point the Honourable Lady raises, because as she'll know, and I think that's why she's rightly raised it, is that currently many of the construction workers for house building, for example, come under freedom of movement rules, and once that changes, we've got to find a way to still allow such workers to come and meet the needs of the economy. And what we have set out, she asked specifically about sort of umbrella sponsorship schemes, and that is in the White Paper.
Steve Double.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I welcome the statement from the Home Secretary and the opportunity to set our own immigration policy that, for the first time in a generation, that will ensure that it is fair, compassionate and meets the needs of our economy. However, the needs of our economy will change over time and also from region to region. So can the Home Secretary assure the House that built into our new immigration policy will be flexibility to be able to respond to the needs of our economy, and also that it will meet the needs of the economy across the whole of the UK, that it won't just be focused around the South East, but will meet the needs of places like Cornwall?
Home Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very happy to give my honourable friend that assurance, and he quite rightly makes the point around needs that will change over time, and this is an immigration system that we've built for the future. It will have those flexibilities to meet the needs of our economy, of our society, and if I give him one example in terms of the short-term workers scheme, when we looked at that, we were looking at many needs of the economy, but including a place if we look at Cornwall, the needs of the hospitality industry, for example, the seasonal nature of much of that demand as well, so I can happily give him that assurance.
Alison Toulis.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have about the highest immigration caseload in Scotland, and what I see from the Home Office is cruelty time and time again. Families being separated, people who've lost babies not allowed their relatives to come and visit, a man who's working 2 jobs as a mortgage advisor and a shelf stacker in Asda just to meet the minimum income threshold so his family can come and see him. All that will happen under this policy is that EU nationals will be treated just as despicably and just as cruelly as those who are not EU nationals at the moment.
Home Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I do not recognise the picture that's painted by the Honourable Lady, and the answer is no.
Nigel Mills.
I welcome the statement. And ask the Secretary to take, could he just explain how his electronic travel authorisation scheme will work with the common travel area, and especially where a visitor arrives in Dublin and then travels on to the UK from there? Will they need to get one in that situation?
Home Secretary.
First of all, in terms of the common travel area, so it will not apply, just to be clear, to Irish citizens and British citizens moving between the common travel area. My honourable friend will know that the EU are also planning to introduce a similar scheme. I think they're calling it ETIAS scheme. And as we develop this, we are looking at ways of working together.
Karen Butt.
Can the Secretary of State confirm
that a chapter is closing during which millions of Britons have over the years been able to live freely across Europe, to work, start businesses and begin relationships in the same way that European citizens have been able to come to this country. And I speak as someone with the constituency with one of the highest proportion of EU citizens. Can he tell us that as the British government will want to negotiate a comprehensive free trade agreement with Europe, our largest and closest trading partner, that there will need to be further concessions around the issue of migration, or is he establishing in this paper a set of red lines that will also determine our trade policy?
Home Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, what we have set out in the White Paper is flexibility for the UK in terms of mobility to strike trade deals around the world. With many countries, including the EU, that there is often a need to look at mobility arrangements, especially for service industries. And what we have set out here is, first of all, it's perfectly compatible with the future political framework document that's been set out by the government, but also as we look to do trade deals further afield with other countries, this document provides the flexibility that we need.
Matt Warman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Largely unskilled agricultural migration has seen Boston's population change by about a third in the last 10 years, but we haven't been able to attract the doctors and professionals that we need to cope with increased demand, and the consequences for community cohesion have been genuinely tragic, and it led directly to the highest vote to leave the European Union in the referendum. So can I say to the Home Secretary that when we get immigration policy wrong, it is a disaster for communities and for individuals. So this new policy is long overdue, but I would ask him please to take the year that he has built in to make sure that we get it right, because that is the only way we will undo some of the damage that has been done by previous government policies of all colours.
Home Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, a very important point from my honourable friend that really highlights that when we look at immigration going forward, it's not just about economic need, but it's also the pace of immigration, the volume of immigration, and he's given an excellent example of a community that has seen a very sudden change, so really quite a dramatic change in a short period of time, and how the local, how there's been an impact on local infrastructure, local public services, for example. So it is very important to get this balance right.
Adrian Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Many black country foundries, which are crucial to the supply chain for both civil aviation and motor industry, are sustained by EU recruits because they have an ageing workforce and can't recruit locally. What conversations has he had with the industry on the impact of the short-term visa requirements on the availability of the EU migrants going forward and the potential impact on their businesses?
Home Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll make 2 points in relation to that. I mean, first of all, for all those EU citizens that are already here working in those foundries and elsewhere, they're all able to stay. We want them to stay, and so there should be no change in the current EU workforce. But going forward, there's both the high-skilled scheme and the short-term workers scheme that's in the White Paper. We have already had engagement with business groups, but what I've set out today is that I think that in terms of finalising that, especially some of the issues around thresholds, periods, cooling off periods, that will be done with much more engagement with business across the country in every region.
David Dukin.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome this government's commitment of giving priority to those workers with the skills that we need. I also welcome my right honourable friend's announcement today of a year-long programme of engagement across the UK. Could I therefore extend an invitation to my right honourable friend, or indeed my honourable friend the Immigration Minister, to come visit my constituency of Bath and Buchan, an area of very low unemployment, and talk to businesses, see for themselves those specific skills that are much needed in the fisheries sector, both in the catching offshore and the seafood processing onshore. Skills which can be sourced, of course, not just from the EU, but from across the world, including Africa and East Asia.
Well, first of all, I'm sure that we would both like to visit, not necessarily at the same time, but we're happy to receive his invitation. But he raises the important point that I think is important for many parts of the UK, but in particular in Scotland. I know this is an issue. I know that he and many other colleagues from Scotland have made this same point, and I think it is important to look at that. I do think the system that we've set out today has the flexibility to meet those needs, but I'm very happy to discuss those with my honourable friend further.
West Streeting.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Immigration, whether from Europe or from right across the world, has made an enormously positive difference to my community and to our country, making us rich in every way imaginable. But given that the Prime Minister and the Cabinet are evident proof that being highly paid and highly skilled are not the same thing, why does the government persist with this nonsense of a £30,000 cap to define what is constituting high skills? There are plenty of people in this country paid far less than the Home Secretary and far less than £30,000, and it would be an absolute tragedy to pull the drawbridge up to those people, denying not just them opportunity, but our country the skills and prosperity that we need too.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's clear the honourable gentleman is lobbying for a pay rise for all the members of the Cabinet, and I'll leave that to him. But it's not something the Cabinet are asking for. When it comes to the threshold for the highly skilled visa route that's in the white paper, it's important that it's based on evidence and that it works for each part of the country. And what the MAC have set out from their research, and it is worth emphasising, it is independent research that they have done, they suggest that it should be a £30,000 threshold. But what is required, I think, is further work and extensive engagement with businesses, with devolved authorities, with members of Parliament and others to determine what that should actually be.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think that my friend from Ilford actually wanted a pay cut for members of the Cabinet. And on that, it feels strange, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thought the Home Secretary was a free marketeer, but what he's given us here is a bureaucrat's charter to increase paperwork and red tape around business. And on page 47 of the White Paper, it specifically says, the MAC has recommended lowering the skills threshold for new skilled workers, whilst maintaining the minimum salary threshold, as has been said, of £30,000. So it's absolutely clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that this is not a skills-based immigration policy, this is a money-based immigration policy. And will the Home Secretary therefore answer how on earth he thinks our country plans to deal with its demographic challenge?
Well said. Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm afraid I don't agree with the assertions the honourable lady has made. I mean, she's suggesting that somehow this is going to lead to more bureaucracy, more red tape. In fact, it does. In fact, what we have set out by, for example, with high-skilled workers having no cap, no resident labour market test for high-skilled workers, more use of e-gates, for example, all these are examples where there will be less bureaucracy and less red tape.
Pete Wishart.
It's just a ferocious blueprint for Drawbridge Britain, a grotesque plan simply to keep people out of this country. But will the Secretary of State take this opportunity to be absolutely straight with the British people today, that their freedom of movement will come to an end? What we do to the EU, they will do to us. And all the rights, unrestricted rights, that we've had in this House to live, to work, to love across a community of 27 nations will be lost to our young people forever. And isn't that an absolute tragedy and shame?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the people of the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union, and that means the end of freedom of movement.
Owen Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Home Secretary rightly said in his statement that this country has a proud history of being an open and welcoming country, but it must sadden him, as it saddens me, that that reputation is being consigned to history by his government, and this White Paper is one further policy that is going to damage that reputation. He also pounds last year. But if it is true, he must have worked it out. So can he tell us exactly how much he thinks this is going to boost our economy by?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't accept that analysis of the White Paper at all. What this White Paper does is it ensures that we remain an open and welcoming country to talent and people for whatever reason they choose to come to the UK from across the world. And the proof of that, for example, is the removal of caps, easier for students to stay and work in the UK, making it easier for people from across the world to visit the UK. That's the example of an open and welcoming country.
Andy Slaughter.
More than 20% of my constituents are EU27 citizens, and more than 40% were born outside the UK. I value their contribution to the economic, social and cultural life of Hammersmith, of London and of the UK. I'd like to hear the Secretary of State join me in saying that, because the hostile environment his and the coalition government have fostered has created alienation, fear and distrust for very many migrants.
Madam Deputy, I'm very happy to join the honourable gentleman in welcoming and commending all the EU citizens that are both in his constituency, my constituency, and throughout the United Kingdom. I have said a number of times that, and it's self-evident, they've made a huge contribution to our country, to the success of our country, not just economically, but in our society more widely, our communities. They, in many cases, are members of our family, and that is why I would like them all to stay.
Ms Savile Roberts.
The proposed salary threshold is £30,000. Average annual pay in Wales is £27,000, compared with £37,000 in London. Wales will be left with a skills crisis impossible to remedy unaided. Can he assure Welsh businesses and communities and confirm now that Wales deserves a specific shortage occupation list and say when it will come into effect?
Good question.
The Honourable Lady, Madam Speaker, is right to raise the issue of regional differences, and the system will take account of that in various ways. So one example specific to Wales is a commitment in the White Paper to look at a shortage occupation list for Wales.
Paul Blomfield.
Deputy Speaker, the Home Secretary owes my honourable friend, the member for Bristol West, an apology for the way in which he brushed aside her question. He made no reference to refugees in his statement, and having now had the opportunity to scan that section of the White Paper, it is peppered with words like maintain, continue, no change. Yes. So if my honourable friend was wrong, will he spell out exactly how this White Paper proposes to improve the way that we receive and treat refugees?
Thank you.
The White Paper is a result of the referendum result, which means no to freedom of movement, which reads... Madam Deputy, if the honourable gentleman will give me a chance, I will actually answer his question. The White Paper is because the vote to leave means that we will have a new immigration system, and the work that was commissioned by the government from the Migration Advisory Committee was to look at what that system should look like by removing freedom of movement and how we would get the skills that we need. So it's very focused on skills. It is not focused on the issue of refugees and any changes, and nor do we have to wait for, in terms of any changes that may or may not be made in terms of refugees. So, for example, there have been a number of changes in recent months and in recent years, whether it's unaccompanied children or in other cases with, for example, Syrian white helmets, and those kind of decisions don't have to wait for a new immigration system. We're perfectly capable of making the decisions now under the current system.
Gavin Robinson.
And Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Home Secretary for listening to the representations that I made on behalf of our party as Home Affairs spokesperson, that our party leader made and that our parliamentary party leader made in respect of the income threshold. And just as Wales is £27,000, Northern Ireland is £24,500. The MAC report were wrong to suggest that there should be a one-size-fits-all income threshold. In going to consultation, it sounds as if the Home Secretary agrees with that. But will he give serious consideration during that consultation and the outcome of that process to regional variations that reflect our regional difference?
It is important, Madam Deputy Speaker, and the honourable gentleman highlights this, is to look at regional differences. One way of trying to accommodate for those is through, for example, which is one way, is through the shortage occupation list, and we have committed here today that Northern Ireland will have its own shortage occupation list. I'm also conscious, and we've referenced that in the White Paper as well, that Northern Ireland is the only part of the UK that has a land border with the EU, which I think causes other issues that need to be looked at as well, and we will certainly take that into account too.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Page 8 of the White Paper retains the notion that there should be targets in our immigration system, objective numbers of people to come, rather than recognising the need to look at skills. Can I encourage a nursing shortage of 100,000? The nursing starting salary is 23,000. And when the government cancelled the nursing bursaries, the numbers of people training to be nurses in this country has dropped by 13%. So when he looks at immigration, he looks at the salary level, can he look at it in the round in our economy and our public services and not take lessons from his benches about cutting our international aid agency, but instead recognise that a country that is spending £1.4 billion on agency fees for nurses within the NHS really needs to rethink how it treats the people who treat us best?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I always listen carefully to what honourable members have to say, what businesses, hospitals and others have to say. And an example of that, when the honourable lady mentions nurses and doctors for that matter, was the change that we made earlier this year to the current Tier 2 scheme to take doctors and nurses out of the cap altogether, which I know was a decision that was welcomed by the sector. But also, the honourable lady may know that nurses are currently on the shortage occupation list, which again shows just how seriously the government takes this issue.
Ian Murray.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My honourable friend, the member for Ogmore, asked the Prime Minister directly at Prime Minister's questions if she still stood behind the ludicrous policy of cutting net migration to tens of thousands. So can the Home Secretary tell the House, if this white paper, and admittedly it is a white paper, but if it's implemented in full, in legislation, what conclusion have the Home Office come to as to the level of net migration as a result?
Yeah, good question.
In terms of levels of net migration, the commitment of this white paper and the system it represents is to bring it down to more sustainable levels.
Jo Stevens.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Average earnings in Wales are in fact less than £26,500 a year. And so does the Home